The stadium did not gradually empty after Alex Eala's Cincinnati exit. It felt as if the entire atmosphere disappeared in an instant. One moment, thousands of Filipino supporters were packed into the stands with Philippine flags raised high, chanting so loudly that the energy seemed to shake the walls, and the next, the noise was gone, banners were folded, rows of seats sat vacant, and only footsteps echoed through the concrete corridors, as the 21-year-old Filipina walked away from the court. Seemingly carrying the entire spirit of the Cincinnati Open with her, Eala had become the biggest drawing force at the $7.4 million tournament, and almost immediately after her departure, organizers were left confronting an uncomfortable question: what had just happened to their event? To understand the emptiness that followed, you first have to understand the extraordinary noise and excitement Eala had created earlier in the week, because the Lindner Family Tennis Center had been transformed into something that looked and sounded completely different, with Philippine flags covering railings, food stands offering dishes such as adobo and pork lumpia, and the merchandise area reportedly running out of Philippine flags as early as the second day. Every time Eala walked onto the court, the venue became packed, loud, emotional, and intensely alive, with one commentator describing the atmosphere as feeling less like a tennis match and more like a basketball game. Fans were even reportedly paying nearly $1,000 on the resale market just to watch Eala in a second-round match rather than a semi-final or final, while tournament officials revealed that an astonishing 80% of ticket inquiries were centered around one question: when is Alex Eala playing? The interest was not primarily focused on stars such as Sabalenka, Swiatek, Goff, or Pegula. It was focused on Eala, a player ranked around number 20 in the world who had somehow become the central attraction of the tournament, and Cincinnati was not experiencing the Eala effect for the first time, because Washington had already seen approximately 80% of ticket requests come from her fan base. While in Toronto, organizers were reportedly forced to move her matches onto center court because the grandstand could not accommodate the crowds, with the 10,000-seat venue selling out on every night she played. Cincinnati had seen the warning signs, yet even with that knowledge, the tournament still appeared unprepared for the level of attention Eala would generate. Then came August 17, 2026, on a late night in Cincinnati, Ohio, when Eala faced Amanda Anisimova, the world number 10, a two-time Grand Slam finalist and former world number 3, in a match that lasted 2 hours and 28 minutes and delivered an extraordinary battle nearly from beginning to end. The opening set alone became a 67-minute struggle filled with pressure, physical endurance, and determination, with the fifth game stretching for a staggering 20 minutes and featuring 13 deuces and 8 break points for Anisimova, all of which Eala managed to save, displaying the composure of a much more experienced player before finally breaking Anisimova in the 10th game and closing the set 6-4. The stadium exploded in response. Philippine flags rose throughout the stands, and the atmosphere became so intense that it felt as though a historic Eala victory might be unfolding in front of the crowd. The second set was much tighter, with both players holding serve through the opening 6 games before Anisimova finally found a clean break, protected her advantage, and forced the match into a deciding set at 1 set apiece. Eala then came out aggressively in the third, held her opening service game, immediately broke Anisimova, and moved ahead 2-0, sending the noise level soaring once again as fans raised their flags and began believing they had seen this story before, remembering Eala's victories over Sabalenka, Goff, Rybakina, and Pegula, along with her impressive 9-4 record against top 10 opponents entering the match, making another major upset seem entirely possible. Then came the pivotal sequence that changed everything and broke the hearts of the crowd, because in the 5th game of the deciding set, Eala reached 40-15, placing herself just 2 points away from extending her lead to 3-2 while holding all the momentum, but instead of closing it out, she dropped the next 4 points consecutively, allowing Anisimova to seize control, and from there the American never surrendered the advantage, taking 6 of the final 7 games and breaking Eala's serve 3 times with a ruthless, clinical stretch of tennis that ultimately produced a 4-6, 6-2, 6-2 victory, when Eala finally walked away from the court. The same stadium that had felt like her home for the previous 7 days suddenly became almost completely silent, with Philippine flags quietly folded, supporters slowly making their way out, and the deafening roar that had defined the entire week replaced by an eerie emptiness. then Anisimova stepped to the microphone and delivered a moment nobody quite expected, beginning by acknowledging Eala's quality and fighting spirit and describing the match as extremely difficult, but she continued by recognizing the extraordinary support Eala had received, explaining that she appreciated the crowd's encouragement for her while also acknowledging just how loved Alex was and saying that there was a very good reason for it. Then, with a smile, Anisimova lightened the mood by joking that she desperately needed the emotional boost because it was already past her bedtime, prompting laughter from the crowd. But beneath the humor was something much more meaningful, a world number 10, two-time Grand Slam finalist, and match winner was openly recognizing that the overwhelming attention inside that stadium had belonged to her opponent. Anisimova was effectively admitting that the Cincinnati crowd had been there primarily for Eala and that surviving such an atmosphere and winning such a difficult match was itself something worth celebrating. Consider how significant that is. It was not a commentator making the observation, not a journalist writing about the crowd afterward, and not a fan exaggerating the moment, but the victorious player herself publicly acknowledging that Eala had earned the love and support of nearly everyone in the stands. That is the true scale of the Eala effect, because it has become so powerful that even the players defeating her feel compelled to recognize it while standing on the winner's side of the microphone. But the story did not end with the emotional disappointment of Eala's elimination, because the following morning brought an even more uncomfortable reality for the Cincinnati Open, with 7 top 10 players still remaining in the tournament, including stars such as Sabalenka, Swiatek, Goff, and Pegula, meaning that some of the biggest names in women's tennis were still competing and the tournament still had plenty of elite talent on court. Yet without Eala, something felt noticeably different, almost as though a central piece of the event's identity had suddenly been removed, because the uncomfortable truth was becoming impossible to ignore. There is one thing tennis administrators may not want to admit publicly: the Eala effect had quietly become the Cincinnati Open itself, because the evidence was impossible to ignore. A resale ticket approaching $1,000 for a second-round match, roughly 80% of ticket demand connected directly to one player's schedule. A food court adding Filipino dishes during the tournament specifically to accommodate her supporters, and merchandise tents running out of Philippine flags within only a few days. Cincinnati had not simply benefited from Alex Eala's presence, it had effectively built much of the week's atmosphere and commercial momentum around her, and the instant she was eliminated, it felt as though the energy, revenue, and excitement disappeared from the venue alongside her. That level of dependence is remarkable and, from a tournament director's perspective, perhaps even unsettling, because for a player ranked around number 20 in the world to generate that much commercial influence is more than an inspiring fan story. It represents a real and measurable financial phenomenon, and Cincinnati appeared to experience the impact immediately once she was gone. However, there is something the scoreboard cannot capture about Eala, and that is why this loss should never be treated as a definition of her career, especially at only 21 years old. She has already defeated 9 top 10 opponents during the season, captured her first WTA title in Washington by beating world number 3 Jessica Pegula in the final, advanced to the 4th round at Wimbledon, and pushed a 2-time Grand Slam finalist into a dramatic 3-set battle that continued deep into the night in Cincinnati, leaving her record against top 10 competition at 9 victories and 5 defeats. Every time Eala steps onto a tennis court, she carries the expectations and hopes of an entire nation. Yet she continues to demonstrate a level of composure and maturity that many players twice her age have struggled to develop. Now the next major chapter is approaching, with the U.S. Open scheduled to begin on August 30th at the USTA Billie Jean King National Tennis Center in New York, and for the first time in her career, Eala is expected to enter the singles main draw as a seeded player. Her connection with Flushing Meadows is already historic, because the previous year she became the first Filipino player in the Open era to win a Grand Slam main draw match there, while this time she returns not simply as a promising young talent but as a genuine contender with significantly greater experience and belief. The North American hard-court swing has provided evidence that her rise is legitimate. Washington demonstrated that she has the ability to win a WTA title, while her performances in Toronto and Cincinnati showed that her success is not the result of one isolated breakthrough but part of a much larger transformation. Losing still hurts, and it always will, but greatness has never been defined by avoiding Defeat, because the players who ultimately become champions are the ones capable of responding after the difficult moments and returning stronger. The silence that descended over Cincinnati after Eala's elimination was real, as was the disappointment, the empty seats, the folded Philippine flags, and the strange emptiness inside a stadium that had been overflowing with energy only hours earlier. But another reality is equally undeniable. Alex Eala is only beginning. She is 21 years old, already ranked among the world's top 20 players, already owns 9 victories over top 10 opponents, and has built a fan base so passionate that supporters are willing to travel enormous distances just to watch her compete. Now, in only 2 weeks, she will step onto the stage of the biggest tennis tournament in the United States as a seeded, experienced, and more motivated player than ever. Meaning Cincinnati may have gone quiet, but New York is preparing to become very, very loud, if you are following Alex Eala through every stage of this remarkable journey. Subscribe for more updates, leave your prediction in the comments, and tell us how far you believe she can go at the US Open and whether she has what it takes to make a deep run at Flushing Meadows.